Joining us now is Cassie Smedile, the Deputy Communications Director for the Republican National Committee. Cassie, we've seen a little more protest taking place in places such as Michigan. We've seen some pushback to the calls by New York Governor Andrew Cuomo to extend the lockdown orders in his states until May 15th, I believe is the date. Do you believe that we're getting to the point where the cure, as they say, is becoming more problematic than the problem itself?
Well, certainly the president has been talking about this for weeks now, where he wants to make sure we're striking that balance between the health and physical well-being of the American people, but also the economic well-being of American families and businesses. So I think that's why you've seen him introduce the task force to reopen the economy. But I would point out that those who are being heavy-handed with these requirements, for example, Governor Whitmer in Michigan, who is preventing people from getting things like potting soil so that they can go out and mow their lawn or plant their garden. That seems to be a heavy-handed approach that is getting the loudest backlash, and rightfully so. So as governors and private sector and the president and the task force work together to figure out the right balance, need to make sure that people aren't taking advantage of this time to use it as putting too much government into people's lives.
And from a political perspective as well, is that something that some candidates in elections should be concerned of, looking around how people are viewing each governor, for example, and saying whether or not that's the right measure, whether or not they're okay sacrificing some civil liberties, if you will, in exchange for curbing the coronavirus outbreak? Do you think that's something that's going to play heavily into elections come November?
Well, I offer the example of Governor Whitmer again, those who have gone beyond what is really necessary, but also what their citizens are okay with and what Michiganders are okay with. And they're looking at that and saying, I think you've really gone overboard here. I think you're missing the forest through the trees of what we're supposed to be doing here. And so if that type of behavior persists, or if it spreads from other folks, that's something that I think voters will remember. And for our part, with President Trump, when you look at him versus candidate Biden and his inability to show any leadership, we have a real-time example of what you get when you vote for President Donald Trump. We are in a crisis. We are in wartime, as he has said. And you're seeing the leadership. You're seeing his all of America approach to getting things done. And that's why you're also seeing in polling that many folks are very appreciative of all of his efforts and appreciative of all of the work he's doing to communicate with the American people as well.
And in fact, Fox News had a poll last week that showed the president at his highest approval rating. And it may be weird for our viewers to hear, but Fox News is actually usually critical in those polls. Usually the president is a little bit lower than people would suspect coming from a network such as Fox. But then I think the president is feeling some of the pressure that you're talking about right now when it comes to reopening the economy. He understands the hardships that a lot of Americans are facing right now when it comes to making a rent payment or just knowing where that next check is coming from, apart from the stimulus one that's coming out. And the president's saying today that he hopes to open up the economy slowly but surely in different areas starting May 1st. It's going to be governor-led, data-driven, and it's been signed off by Dr. Redfield of the CDC, Dr. Birx, and Dr. Fauci. Do you think that this is the approach to take when it comes to this kind of a more regional and state-by-state type of approach compared to what some of his critics have been calling for, which was first a nationwide lockdown and then a nationwide type of approach to this? Do you think state-by-state is appropriate?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's reassuring to hear the president saying that they're looking at this even county by county. You know, sometimes in a state, you might have an area that has seen a lot of cases of COVID-19, and then you go 200 miles away and they have zero. So how do you, again, find that balance between making sure that that everyone is getting the response that they need? If you need to keep some areas further locked down for a little longer, but then you're able to open up other areas, how to do that safely and responsibly. And I think it's just great that not only are you bringing in governors, state and local officials, private sector, but also working with the health officials to get to, I keep using the word balance, but to get to a balanced approach that they can feel comfortable with as well.
And it is just that. It's a balanced approach because the whole idea of leveling the curve, I mean, it's a phrase that I've used 100 times over the past week, but it's not to eradicate the virus. It's to make sure that the surge of people aren't overwhelming our hospital system. And I think that is what we're still looking at. Even once the economy opens up, there's still going to be coronavirus cases. It's not a matter of completely getting rid of the disease. It's making sure that the hospitals are not overwhelmed. But looking ahead, say that you're in 2020, you're in November, and you're looking back on this entire situation. What is the best political type of messaging that the Trump campaign can be making to voters come that time?
You had a leader. You had a leader in chief who came and he promised, this is another promise made, promise kept, quite frankly. When President Trump was candidate, he said, you're going to have a fighter for you in the White House, but you're also going to have a businessman in the White House. And so when you see his approach to this, how he's gotten all of these people together, different factions, whether it's healthcare officials, again, the public-private partnerships, that's such a pro-free market approach that you only get from having a pro-business, pro-American president in the White House. And then to also work with state and local officials to figure out what makes the sense so that we're not being too heavy-handed. Government isn't being too heavy-handed. But again, I point back to this is a real-time example of that promise made and promise kept. And when you look at what the Democrats would do, first of all, you have Joe Biden, who can't come up with any sort of meaningful plan. Then you have Democrats like Pelosi and Schumer just today, who are again blocking hundreds of millions of dollars that are a lifeline for our small businesses so that they don't have to start from scratch, or that they can reopen once we get on the other side of this. And instead, they're blocking that and playing politics. That's the difference between what President Trump and his coalition is working towards for the American people and what Democrats' response would have been should they been in charge of this process.
Yeah, Americans knew about the president's business past, but a big question that a lot of people had, his critics and his supporters, was how he would step up in a time of crisis. So I'm going to be looking very closely at polling to see how people say that he did coming out of this and the bump that he gets going into November, especially if the economy starts climbing back over the summer. So I think that'll be interesting to keep an eye on. Cassie Smedile, always a pleasure talking to you, breaking down the news of the day. Thank you very much for joining us.